Shabbat Shalom. Last week, the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, wrote, as he was responding to the violent riots on Sunday night, the rampage by settlers were taking revenge on the Palestinian town of Hawara, and that was following a horrific terrorist attack in which two young men, had been murdered, and the perpetrators originated in Hawara. And Isaac Herzog said, "This is not our way. It is criminal violence against innocents. It harms the state of Israel, it harms us, it harms settlers, it harms security forces who are busy searching for those responsible for the terror attack. And most of all, it harms us as a moral society and a lawful country. It is not our way as a moral society, as a lawful country, and we are harmed by it." And I think it's what this latest event really made even more clear and prescient, the seriousness of this moment. And the fact that it came just a week before Purim. And last week, after all of this, I was on Facebook and reading a comment that had been made by someone in Israel about the tears of all of those who had suffered and all of this violence. And someone had written in there, well, the door has been opened to all the revenge thoughts of Purim. Because Purim, as we know, is our most joyous holiday. Right? On Purim, we remember the awesome redemption, the miraculous redemption of the Jews from Haman's plot. And really a story of how this one man who was considered to be of the lineage of Amalek, which is the theme of this Shabbat, one man who had a desire for power and no love in his heart, and was able to play on the vulnerability of a displaced people, of us, the Jewish people, and then was able to rile up the baser instincts of his countrymen and come very close to destroying an entire nation. And ultimately, it's also the story of the goodness, of the integrity of how one man, Mordechai, and the courage and faith of one woman, Esther, and that they were able to overcome the hatred and save our people in this divine act of grace against the hatred of Amalek, of Haman. And we have always understood this as one more chapter in our battle against Amalek. We read about in the Torah, in our story of our birth as a nation. We read in the book of Samuel another chapter, and this was another chapter. Right? This is what we read about. What is Amalek? We should always remember that which the nation of Amalek did to us when we wandered in the desert. How they attacked us when we were exhausted and vulnerable. How they went after the weak and the elderly. How they struck at the women and children who straggled at the end of the camp. God is at war with Amalek, the Torah declares, from generation to generation. And so Purim reminds us of all of the Amalek in our world, the pure evil, those who have no pity, who attack the weary and vulnerable. And that's why we have this ritual booing, which is humorous and evokes the sense of play of our younger ones, but really it's a serious thing. We're booing, we're blotting out, or we're ritually removing that spirit from amidst us. Then there's also another side, a tragic side to the story of Purim, at least from our modern perspective. And that is how in the very end of the story, whenever we read the Megillah, I say, all the young children can leave at this moment if they would like to. about how the Jews were given an open door for revenge against all those who were plotting against them. And they walked through that door, and they rejoiced in that revenge. And first, our revenge was against Haman himself, and then the revenge was against all of Haman's sons, but then also against tens of thousands who were also killed, allies, as part of it. I once sort of thought that perhaps this is why God's name is not mentioned at all in the Megillah, a sign of divine disfavor. And Purim also calls for us a different contemplation of what Amalek is. Because sometimes we're so busy looking for the Amalek without that we forget about the Amalek within. And the Apter Rebbe Abraham Joshua of Apt, he used to write, Zachor Amalek, remembering Amalek in our day, and he lived in different circumstances than we do in our much more open society. It's really about looking about the Amalek in our own selves. And the sad truth is that much of the time there's not that much that we can do about the exterior Amalek. The world always has evil in it, and we do have to always fight it. But what can we as individuals do? There's always something. But the Amalek within, that we know we have control over. That we know we can do something about. As individuals and as a people. And there is much to worry about the Amalek within at the moment. And as our rabbis teach, we each have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, a good inclination and a not so good inclination, a bad inclination. And as individuals, we do all have somewhere some of that Amalek within. A place where we give in to our lowest instincts, the places where we are at our narrowest, where there is an open door to hate, to seeing others as less than ourselves, less than human. And as a people with a very long and complex history and identity, and we've been through so much, and there are parts of our tradition that as a minority who had to survive thousands of years of oppression, that the parts of us that developed within us that do not always express our highest aspirations. When chosenness become the supremacy of the Jews, when their hatred of us became our hatred of them and of all of those who are not like us, and when our redemption and our power became an opportunity for revenge. And so when we take those strands within our tradition and we combine them with a miraculous return to sovereignty after 2,000 years of having no power, suddenly becoming a majority, suddenly being back in the ancient biblical land and reviving some of those biblical attitudes that we read in our Haftarah towards vengeance against enemies, our biblical decrees to destroy enemies, it's allowed a monstrous part of Judaism to fester. And Zachor Amalek is also an opportunity to remember that Amalek within. So the perpetrators of last week's riots were following in the footsteps of the Jewish mass terrorist Baruch Goldstein, an American immigrant. And it was on Purim Day itself. He didn't pick that out of nowhere. On Purim Day itself, he entered into a mosque in the cave of the Machpelah, of the patriarchs, and he murdered 29 worshipers and injured hundreds. It was on Purim because he believed that he was causing the redemption of the Jews. And that he was doing the same as what was happening in the Purim story, that he was destroying Amalek. What a tragic twisting of our story. And his supporters still believe that. Even after his terrible act, he was greeted as a hero among many. Right? Ben Gvir, a member of parliament and a minister of the government in Israel right now, had a picture of Baruch Goldstein in his living room until recently. And Baruch Goldstein's tomb became a place of pilgrimage for people who were channeling all of these misplaced parts of our tradition. And in the end, there are years where we feel that the essence of Zachor Amalek is not to turn into that Amalek ourselves, and not to ignore the wake-up calls when they come our way. And even when there is a justified response, and a justified human reaction of some kind to terrible loss and pain, we still cannot let Amalek in. And it's precisely the urge that we need, the urge of revenge that we need to conquer, that is conquering Amalek in those times. As Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, says, Ezehu Gibor, who is a hero? HaKovesh et Yitzcho, the one who conquers his evil inclination at that moment of it rising up within us. And maybe that is the real heroism that the book of Esther demands of us at this fraught moment. So there was an article last week, right after those riots. It was reporting on how there were members of the Knesset, right after the terrorist attack, who were calling for revenge in the burning of that town. And that once the riots began, suddenly became silent. And some even continued to support revenge, but others remained silent. And Amalek is also looking the other way and not standing up when this is happening. So our tradition calls us to make war against the nation of Amalek and blot it out. We have many traditions of what precisely Amalek is and how the rabbis understood it. But it was essentially at its base a single nation that existed thousands of years ago and that no longer exists. But yet now we all have that ability to let Amalek in. And I was reminded of a quote which I enjoy using in other circumstances, and which tragically reminded me of this, which is once some students of the Kotzker Rebbe were with their Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked them, what is God? Where is God? And they all gave brilliant answers. So God is the place, God is here, God is there. But at the end, the Kotzker Rebbe said, well, God is wherever you let him in. And maybe Amalek is the same. Amalek is wherever you let it in. And it is our duty to find that Amalek, that part that has no pity, within, without, that attacks the weary and the vulnerable, even within our own selves, to remember its existence and to blot it out. Shabbat Shalom.